Hi, everyone. I'm Vladimir Dutit. We are following some breaking news for you this morning. Israel's military says it is investigating the possibility that it has killed this man, the leader of Hamas. His name, Yahya Sinwar. This would have happened in Gaza. Now, if this is confirmed, this would mark a major development in the war in the Middle East. So for more on this, I want to bring in CBS News foreign correspondent Ramy Inocencio. And to top that conversation, I also want to bring in CBS News national security correspondent Charlie D'Agata, who's joining me from the Pentagon. Ramy, let me begin with you. I know we're awaiting word from the Israeli military. What are we hearing at this point? If they have not confirmed this killing, what did you first start to hear? When did you first learn that this could be a possibility?
Vlad, hi there. Yeah, that's right. In the 3 p.m. hour local time, about an hour 15, hour 30 minutes ago, the IDF released a statement, in fact, saying that during operations that it was conducting in the Gaza Strip, that they eliminated 3 terrorists, 3 militants. And the IDF are now checking the possibility that one of those people was, in fact, Yahya Sinwar, Hamas's leader and mastermind of the October 7th terror attacks here on Israel. At this stage, we know that the identity of those men are still not yet confirmed, but the IDF has added that in the building where those people were killed, where those terrorists were killed, there were no signs of the presence of hostages in the area. Now, I raise this because the understanding is that Sinwar always surrounded himself with hostages as so-called human shields. But Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu did tell the IDF to inform the families of the abductees that there were no signs of harm to any abductees in that encounter. Right now, we're waiting for confirmation that Sinwar is in fact dead.
Charlie, let me go over to you. There have been reportings before this from many people who follow geopolitical strategies around the Middle East that if this man were to be killed, that could bring about an end to this conflict between Israel and Gaza. So how significant would it be if his death is reported to be accurate?
Well, extremely significant because he has been the armed leader or the armed wing leader of Hamas for a number of years. As Ramy said, the architect, one of the architects of the October 7th massacres. He is very much in charge of the military side of Hamas. He became the outright leader of Hamas after the assassination of Ismail Haniyeh in August. So he is the leader of Hamas, and he has been driving almost all of the military offenses, including what happened and unfolded in October 7th. And I can give you a little background, if you wish, about Sinwar himself. Yeah, so he was born in 1962 in Khan Yunis, the refugee camp. We've been reporting on Khan Yunis. It's been battered in the Gaza war. He rose among military ranks. He became known as the Butcher of Khan Yunis for the killing of several people, but including the killing of 12 Israeli soldiers. He was imprisoned in the 1980s. He was actually released in 2011 by Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu himself in exchange for an Israeli hostage or an Israeli soldier that had been taken hostage. But as I said, he is very much the leader of the armed wing of Hamas, and Hamas is an armed militant group, and his loss will be significant. It's also worth noting that his name has come up a few times in terms of trying to figure out a peace deal that he may be able to get, free passage out of Gaza. But almost every Israeli military person you spoke to said that he would never get out of Gaza alive.
Yeah, and Ramy, the question, of course, having both you and Charlie been reporting on the ground since this conflict began back on October 7th, a little over a year ago, which is, okay, Israel killed the predecessor to this now leader, Yahya Sinwar. I guess the question a lot of people are going to have, Ramy and Charlie, you can jump in on this too, is, in other words, you cut off one head and another one sprouts up to take its place. Is there anybody within Hamas that would take Yahya Sinwar's place, or would this literally be cutting off the head of the beast and ultimately killing it?
Yeah, great question, Vlad. How it looks like is all of the leaders, all of the names have been very public, very well known over the past decades, and that may be the question that Hamas is wondering itself: who is next up to lead? If Sinwar is indeed dead, the shock is probably rippling across Hamas members across Gaza, along with the Middle East. But with his potential death, the mastermind of October 7th, Sinwar has long been at the top of the list of people to be assassinated, according to Israeli media. It leaves Hamas without that leader for now, again, if he is dead. But for Israel, here it would also potentially allow Netanyahu to claim a major success after more than the past year of striking Gaza, leaving much of it destroyed. But also for Israel, freeing hostages still on the minds of so many here. About 100 or so believed to be alive and dead. And I just want to share with you a couple things from Israeli media, again with the caveat that there's no official confirmation that Sinwar is dead, but from Israeli media right now saying that these 3 bodies that were found with large amounts of money and fake IDs. The DNA and the fingerprints are now being checked, and that's important because Israel has all of this from Sinwar's time in prison and also from a year in hospital, as Charlie just mentioned. Some reports now are claiming that if it was Yahya Sinwar, he came out for air, and IDF forces there eliminated him if this did happen, probably thinking that he was just a militant at that time.
So Charlie, I read an interesting report in the New York Times a few weeks ago that suggested that Sinwar was not actually interested in reaching any kind of a ceasefire deal with Israel, that he believed that the longer he held out and the wider Israel's scope of military operations grew, that he would be in a better position to force Israel to actually stop on their own without having to reach any kind of a deal. So I guess, again, the question now that if it turns out he has been eliminated, whoever is to take his place, would they be more interested in striking a deal with the Israelis?
I mean, it's a good question, Vlad, and it would be speculation at this point. But I think when we talk about the elimination of Sinwar himself, when Ismail Haniyeh was assassinated in August, ostensibly the political leader of Hamas, it wouldn't have an impact on Hamas itself. They were certainly the chief negotiator in that would have maybe had an impact on the release of the hostages, but not in terms of the military leadership there. We also have to note here that it's not just Sinwar who's being killed. Over the course of the past more than a year, top ranking Hamas leadership has been killed. So the second in charge, the third in command, fourth in command, they're all dead. So it will be a vacuum. Now, in terms of the negotiation, you're right. Yes, Sinwar, well, I think he realized that he was either going to have to fight to the death or negotiate from a position of power in order to try to find some negotiation. It wasn't going to be somewhere where it would be a surrender, as it were. So now we have to see what kind of impact this is going to have on Hamas itself, because the fighters are still fighting, but they have been getting clobbered for more than a year now. And he, as I said, he wasn't a figurehead. This is very much a dynamic military leader within the Hamas leadership.
And yet, Charlie, we know that both Hamas and also Hezbollah in southern Lebanon are proxies for Iran. In the wake of all those assassinations of all those leaders who represent these organizations, we know that the money and the material is, for the most part, supplied by Iran. How does Iran fit into all of this if it turns out that Sinwar has been assassinated?
Well, I think we have to pay attention to the fact that the relationship that Iran has with Hamas is not quite as close as it is to Hezbollah for religious reasons. They have backed Hamas. Certainly, they have armed Hamas. But in the case of Hamas, it's more been, the friend of my enemy, et cetera, et cetera. So at the same time, Iran will not stand idly by, as they have not when we saw the assassinations in Damascus and also in Tehran. There was a retaliation, a very large retaliation. So, we're also on the verge of an Israeli retaliation for the Iran bombardment that took place, where everybody here keeps asking every day, when is it going to happen? When is it going to happen? You know that U.S. forces are now on the ground inside Israel with another missile battery to prop up Israelis' air defenses. So this is cranking up. So yes, will Iran react to this? Almost certainly. They'll certainly have something to say. Will they react militarily? Well, that's a wait and see.
Rami, let me ask you about the point that was made earlier, that we suspected that Sinwar would have surrounded himself with hostages if the Israelis were ever to try to attempt to assassinate him. As you've all reported, it doesn't appear that this happens to be the case. The Israeli military saying that there were no hostages in this space where they conducted this strike. But what's the word on the street? Are Israelis perhaps, I know this news is just breaking, but are Israelis, have they been perhaps heartened by the fact that if this man were to be assassinated, that might be a glimmer of hope in returning some of those hostages or getting some of those hostages home?
I suppose the short answer to that is yes, Vlad. However, you also have to look at this through the lens of the constant pressure that the families of abductees have been putting on the government of Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. With that said, this potential, let's say potential success right now, if Sinwar has been eliminated, could very well turn the political table on that, in that Netanyahu could then say, look, although there has been a lot of pressure saying to stop the war, stop the destruction, stop the airstrikes on Gaza, Yahya Sinwar has been at the top of the list of the assassination sheet for Israel and its military. So this would be very much a massive coup, the biggest coup for Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to say, look, a lot of you, many of you, most of you perhaps did not agree with me, but here there is this win, there is this success, and we will take it.
All right, Charlie Daggett for us at the Pentagon, Remy Inocencio reporting from Tel Aviv this morning for us. Thank you both very, very much. Again, if you're just joining us here, we are following developments. The IDF in Israel is investigating whether the chief of Hamas, Yahya Sinwar, has been killed. We are awaiting confirmation from the Israeli officials. They seem to suggest that it could be that this strike that they carried out took out the leader of Hamas, but they are looking into a DNA, which they have from his time in prison and from his time in hospital stay. So once we get that confirmation, we're going to bring it to you live right here on CBS News 24/7. Let's switch gears now and turn to the race for the White House. Vice President Kamala Harris is in Wisconsin today, and former President Donald Trump will attend a charity dinner in New York tonight. CBS News senior White House and political correspondent Ed O'Keefe is joining me now to talk about that. Ed, good to see you, my friend. So, as you know, the Vice President sat down with Bret Baier and Fox News yesterday, had a very robust conversation, a back and forth with the anchor. What were some of the takeaways from that discussion? And I know that Gail said this to you earlier on CBS Mornings. Depends on the political lens that you're looking at this interview through. If you are for Kamala Harris, you think she did a great job. And if you are someone who supports former President Trump, you think that she got demolished.
Exactly. And it's that group of people in the middle who may not have a strong opinion on either of these candidates or how she would have done in that interview that she's after. And we should acknowledge that if you get any word from the Middle East of news, go right ahead with it, because that obviously will shake up things on the campaign trail as well. But in that interview, I think what was most striking is she got a lot more questions, for example, on immigration and the focus that President Trump and that network have had on how a small handful of undocumented immigrants have caused some pretty egregious and high-profile crimes across the country that have been mentioned, some would say exploited, by Trump and other Republicans to make the point more broadly about the potential dangers of illegal immigration. But she also, and this is what her campaign was focused on, wanted to use the opportunity on that conservative news network to make some points that viewers perhaps don't hear as often from its anchors and hosts, including Bret Baier. Specifically, some of the things he has had to say in the past about what he would do to critics should he be reelected. Take a listen.
You and I both know that he has talked about turning the American military on the American people. He has talked about going after people who are engaged in peaceful protest. He has talked about locking people up because they disagree with him. This is a democracy. And in a democracy, the President of the United States, in the United States of America, should be willing to be able to handle criticism without saying he'd lock people up for doing it.
So that was one of the more contentious moments in that interview. And again, the Harris team believes that was worth her time and comes amid a series of interviews she's done just this week with people like Charlemagne the God, the popular talk show host, especially among African-American listeners and viewers, all of it designed to say, I'm taking tough questions from interviewers of all sorts. Donald Trump is canceling on 60 Minutes. He apparently canceled the CNBC interview this week, and there are some reports this morning he may have canceled another interview with NBC. All of it designed to say, what's he hiding from? Why isn't he willing to face the music from people who perhaps aren't as supportive of him as others are?
Yeah, and partly one would speculate, Ed, is when he does, for example, in that town hall that took place with Univision, he got asked some very tough questions, including from one voter who said he was a Republican and asked the former president some very pointed questions about January 6th and the fact that members of his own cabinet in his former administration are no longer supporting him, including his vice president. And I thought it was interesting that the former president, in describing the events of January 6th, there was one thing that struck me, and I was talking again about this on CBS Mornings with Gail and Tony, which is when the president was describing the events of January 6th, he described the mob as we and the U.S. Capitol Police as they, as if he, as the head of the government, the commander-in-chief, was not part of the infrastructure that is our body politic.
Right. Well, let's play the clip because we have it. Might as well. Go ahead.
They didn't come because of me. They came because of the election. They thought the election was a rigged election, and that's why they came. Some of those people went down to the Capitol. I said peacefully and patriotically, nothing done wrong at all, nothing done wrong. And action was taken, strong action. Ashley Babbitt was killed. Nobody was killed. There were no guns down there. We didn't have guns. The others had guns, but we didn't have guns. And when I say we, these are people that walked down. This was a tiny percentage of the overall, which nobody sees and nobody shows.
Several sharp questions he got on January 6th, on immigration and other issues he doesn't normally face. And worth a look. And Vlad, you get extra credit for properly pronouncing the name of the network, Univision.
Thank you, Ed. When I get proper credit for something, I'm a happy baby. Thank you very much, Ed O'Keefe, reporting for us this morning. Ed, we love having you on. Thank you, my friend. All right, coming up, the largest ever settlement from the Roman Catholic Church for alleged child sex abuse crimes. What we know about the folks' $800 million settlement. You're streaming CBS News 24/7. The long-awaited report about the first attempted assassination of former President Donald Trump in Butler, Pennsylvania, was just released. And the report by the Independent Review Board finds that the United States Secret Service, quote, requires fundamental reform, end quote, and has systemic issues that must be addressed with urgency. CBS News Homeland Security and Justice reporter Nicole Sganga has the very latest on this. So, Nicole, break down what the report says are the 6 failures that the Independent Review Panel identified.
Yeah, there are a series of issues outlined in this blistering 35-page report. In a letter to the DHS secretary, the bipartisan panel of former Homeland Security officials warning that without fundamental reform, they believe another Butler can and will happen. And a new detailed timeline in the report revealing local officers radioed to alert that the gunman was armed and laying down just 30 seconds before shots rang out. That message never made it to the Secret Service, including the counter sniper teams that shot and killed the gunman just 16 seconds later. Former President Trump's protective detail formed a body bunker around him, and the panel revealed they moved him into his armored vehicle. That took approximately 1 minute, not a lot of time by most standards, but 60 seconds, quite a lot for law enforcement. The review also revealing that Secret Service's counter-drone technology failed during a critical period as Thomas Crooks flew his own drone above the rally site earlier in the day, and no one alerted Trump's detail leadership about the gunman before the former president took the stage, Vlad.
All right, Nicole Sganga with that breaking news for us and the Secret Service and the reforms that need to take place in that agency. Nicole, as always, we appreciate you. All right, overseas now, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky is trying to rally support from European nations to end the war with Russia. President Joe Biden is hoping a trip to Germany will help shore up that support. He's on his way right now to Berlin. CBS News White House reporter Willie James Inman is already there in Berlin and has more on this trip. Willie James, good to see you, my friend. So explain to our viewers, what is the administration hoping to get out of this trip? And more specifically, what does President Volodymyr Zelensky hope to convince President Biden of?
Hey there, Vlad. Good to be with you this morning from Berlin. President Biden is headed here to speak with his German counterpart, Chancellor Olaf Scholz. And part of that conversation will be thanking him, quite literally, for helping come up with those negotiations, the behind-the-scenes negotiations, intense, I might add, multinational negotiations to free those prisoners from Russian prisons. And so we anticipate that the Chancellor and the President will have a warm conversation there. On top of that, as you mentioned, there is a situation with Ukraine. Now, the President of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, really wants those long-range weapons. So far, the White House, President Biden, hasn't signed off on giving him just that. It will be a conversation about how to further support Ukraine, not just with military aid, which the White House announced yesterday, some $425 million worth, but that continued assistance provided from the Europeans and the United States as well, some $50 billion in loan that would essentially go to Ukraine, backed by those seized Russian assets from multiple countries. That's a conversation that President Biden will have amongst the leaders of Germany, France, and the United Kingdom tomorrow. Vlad.
All right, Willie James Inman reporting from Berlin this morning for us. Willie James, thank you very much. The Catholic Archdiocese of Los Angeles will pay nearly $900 million to the victims of alleged sex abuse of the church. The claims were made by more than 1,300 alleged victims, and these date back to the 1940s. I want to bring in CBS News legal contributor and Loyola Law School professor Jessica Levinson to talk about this. So, Jessica, this is such a heartbreaking story. Just for our viewers to understand, break down the claims that the victims made against the church. And as I pointed out, these go back almost 75 years.
Well, that's right. What we're talking about here are really tragic claims of sexual abuse, often that was perpetrated against minors by priests, and church leadership knowing that this was happening and moving these priests from place to place. So we're talking about two things here, really: the claims of sexual abuse themselves and the church knowing and covering it up. And Vlad, that's what really brings us to this staggering figure today. Let's remember, this is about half of the total. The Los Angeles Archdiocese has now, with this settlement, agreed to pay about $1.5 billion. And that's in part because California recently changed the law. It looks a lot like the law in New York that allowed E. Jean Carroll to bring her sexual assault claims against Donald Trump. And essentially what the law does is it opens up the statute of limitation. It allows victims to sue for a longer period of time. It creates a 3-year look back for adult victims who wouldn't fall within that longer period. And it includes treble damages for an institution that tries to cover up that sexual abuse. So that's what we see in the settlement today. It really is a result, I believe, of California changing that law, providing for more lawsuits to be able to come forward.
Yeah, we just threw up a quote from the Archbishop of Los Angeles, offering his he's sorry and hopes that these claims or the settlement will provide some measure of healing. But what I think striking for a lot of people is what the church doesn't say, which is that we were wrong, that we did something wrong. And that's why this number is so astoundingly high. As you know, the agreement in principle was reached to settle those remaining claims filed under Assembly Bill 218. So explain just what that bill played and how that bill played a role in this case.
Yeah, exactly. So as we said, that's a new California law. It's about 4 years old. It's really modeled after that New York law, which allowed E. Jean Carroll to sue Donald Trump. And it's part of a number of states saying when it comes to victims of sexual abuse, we want to enlarge the normal statute of limitations. We won't say, sorry, your case is too old. So the law basically does three things. It says that the statute of limitations is longer if you are a victim of sexual abuse while you were a child. It says that you can bring these claims up to the time that you're 40 years old or from 5 years of discovery. It also says for adult victims who wouldn't fall within that bucket, you have an additional 3-year look back where you can bring some of your claims, and it provides for treble damages. So any suit that's brought under this new law could be much more expensive for the defendants. And I think that's largely why we see the church saying, yes, we will agree to this number. And this largely brings to a close the tragic chapter of these suits being filed as a result of this tragic sexual abuse against the Los Angeles Archdiocese. But Vlad, you asked me about a state law. This is a state law, and there are other chapters that are similarly facing suit under this law.
Yeah, I just look at that picture we just showed of the victims as children, these innocent children who put their trust in a church that ultimately betrayed them. I don't think any amount of money will ever repair that brokenness. Thank you, Jessica, for your breakdown. We appreciate you. All right, folks, we are continuing to follow the breaking news out of Israel. The Israelis are investigating the possibility that it killed Hamas's leader. We're going to have the very latest next. You're streaming CBS News 24/7. We continue to follow the breaking news this morning. Israel's military says it's investigating the possibility that it has killed the leader of Hamas, Yahya Sinwar, in Gaza. I want to send it over to our partners at the BBC. They are speaking with a former IDF official. Let's listen. My colleagues.
Yes, good afternoon. It's a holiday in Israel, the holiday of Sukkot, and news are traveling fast. What I'm hearing is that there's very high levels of confidence in the fact that it was indeed Sinwar. I must say that there's also quite a lot of surprise. According to what I understand so far, this wasn't anything like how Israel took out many of the other terrorists in the region, Hassan Nasrallah, Fuad Shukr, Ismail Haniyeh, and many others, based on intel and a targeted elimination. This appears to have been quite more fortunate. I think it's been said in the past, I've said it, that Yahya Sinwar and all the other terrorists, they have to be lucky every time in order to evade their fate. And Israel only has to be lucky once. And it appears, by the information that we have available now, that Israel indeed got lucky, and that Israeli soldiers in an above-ground contact with terrorists in the central southern part of the Gaza Strip indeed got Yahya Sinwar. And as you said correctly, there's a lot of DNA in Israeli storage that they'll be able to verify with. And I think that within the coming less than an hour, we will have an official Israeli confirmation of it.
Just to clarify what you said, because it is so interesting just listening to that answer, you're saying, in effect, the IDF got lucky here. It was above ground and they simply stumbled into this group. Is that right?
Well, that's the information I get so far, because other instances where terrorist leaders were taken out, many other people who are part of the defense establishment would know in advance, and there would be preparations, and the media kit would be ready, and necessary precautions were taken before. That wasn't the case now. There's been a lot of buzzing rumors over the last few hours, but nothing confirmed yet, and that is different. And the fact that he was encountered, if it really was him, above ground and not in one of the tunnels where he reportedly hid for about a year. And it should be emphasized, and this is very important for Israeli listeners and anybody who cares about the fate of the hostages, what Israeli forces have put out very quickly is that there was no trace or evidence of hostages in the whereabouts where Yahya Sinwar, if it was him, was apprehended or where he was killed, which is very important for Israeli's family.
Sorry to cut across you, but that's significant, isn't it? Because
All right, folks, you've been following along to a BBC interview with a former IDF official. As the breaking news, if you're just joining us, the IDF is investigating whether the leader of Hamas, Yahya Sinwar, has been killed. DNA testing is being carried out right now on the bodies of 3 individuals that were killed in this Israeli strike. Once that confirmation comes to us, we will bring it to you live right here on CBS News 24/7. Let's get to some other news now. Here in the United States, a man in Texas is scheduled to become the first person executed tonight for the death of a toddler blamed on shaken baby syndrome. Robert Robertson was convicted more than 20 years ago for the murder of his 2-year-old daughter. A judge rejected defense claims that the little girl actually died from complications due to pneumonia. The state board voted yesterday not to commute his sentence or to delay his execution by lethal injection. CBS News national correspondent Nikki Batiste has the very latest from Huntsville, Texas. So, Nikki, one of the things that struck me about this very tragic story on all sides is Mr. Robertson was diagnosed with autism after that conviction because one of the investigators said that he displayed little emotion when talking about the death of his child. Talk to me about that and how that played into his conviction.
Yeah, it's a really interesting point in this case. The lead detective on this case, Brian Wharton, whom I spoke with, initially felt that Robertson's reaction to his daughter's death was unemotional. He said he had a flat affect. Years later, Robertson was diagnosed with autism, which was relayed to this detective who said that explained everything. I completely misunderstood him. And since then, he has been fighting to save Robertson's life. And I think really that initial impression and judgment of Robertson's behavior then is what led to the immediate assumption that this was a shaken baby case. It really just set off a sequence of events, Vlad.
Tell us why shaken baby syndrome, also known as abusive head trauma, is so controversial in 2024.
Yeah, there's been a lot of debate in the medical field about whether or not shaken baby syndrome is even a sort of a real diagnosis. Is it even possible to shake a baby so hard to cause such severe brain injury? Some doctors and scientists say it is not. Others say it is. The American Academy of Pediatrics still recognizes shaken baby syndrome as an actual diagnosis. But separately, and particularly in this case, it's come into question in criminal cases because many experts say you can't just assume that severe brain injury is shaken baby syndrome. You have to first look at all the other options that could cause such severe brain injury, and that's exactly what happened in this case. Vlad?
All right, Nikki Batiste from Huntsville, Texas this morning for us, tracking. We'll find out later today if those calls to prevent that execution from happening are actually successful. Nikki, thank you very much. All right, folks, there is a new wave of calls for Congress to get back to work and approve a new round of hurricane relief funding. We've been talking about that all week. We reported yesterday that the Small Business Administration is out of funds for new loans, and the pressure is mounting. Let's bring in congressional correspondent Scott McFarland, who's live in Washington, D.C. for us this morning. So, Scott, where does this all stand right now?
This is an emerging problem, and it's the government's version, Vlad, of standing up and pulling the pants pockets out and showing there's no money left in here. We are plumb out. The Small Business Administration's disaster loan program gives money up front, very low-cost loans to homeowners, businesses who have damage from hurricanes and natural disasters. They have burned through all the money they had available with Hurricanes Helene and Hurricane Milton. And they say, without Congress coming back here to appropriate, to provide more money, they have stopped issuing loans, even though there are still needy people from the hurricanes and potentially more natural disasters to come. But congressional leaders have resisted these calls to come back here and set aside new money, and they continue doing so today. In a statement to CBS News, the U.S. House Speaker said the Biden administration has money available, potentially money it can move into these accounts to keep the loans going. The Small Business Administration says otherwise. So here we are, Vlad. We have a standoff on this issue, and until further notice, until at least mid-November, no new loans will be issued.
I think it's just remarkable to me that members of Congress, I don't care which party they're a member of, would look at the face of the destruction caused by these hurricanes and say, you know what, I got better things to do in my district. The people who are suffering now are going to have to wait until November. And is there anything, Scott, you would know better than I, that could compel Congress to return and do the business that they need to do to help the American people in their districts?
That's a really good question. First of all, let me underscore, this is a bipartisan dynamic. There are members of Congress from both parties in those hurricane-impacted states saying, please come back, let's all come back, let's fix this for our constituents. And it's worth reminding folks that the House is controlled by Republicans, the Senate is controlled by Democrats, neither side's coming back. So this is a bipartisan issue, not single party. Can something be done? Yes, Congress, after Hurricane Katrina back in 2005, was able to pass some emergency aid without bringing everybody back to town. There are some simple ways to do this by unanimous consent. But at this point, with politics the way they are in 2024, not a lot of optimism Congress will do anything by unanimous consent, even something as important and simple as this.
Unbelievable. Scott McFarland, excellent reporting, my friend. Thank you very much. Appreciate you. Okay, let's switch gears now and do some weather. Let's bring in CBS News senior weather correspondent Rob Marciano with a first look at the national forecast. Rob, tell me it ain't so. Snow?
Come on, Vlad, you felt it, right? The fall has arrived with a vengeance here. I mean, some of the coldest, it is the coldest air of the season. And yes, there has been snow, and there's going to be some more snow. It's kind of a clash of the seasons in northern New England and upstate New York. This is Whiteface, New York, that mountain. You can't really see it obscured by the cloud cover. Almost to 5,000 feet. So one of the tallest mountains in the Adirondacks, and certainly enough to turn the beautiful foliage of fall all white. Some of the maintenance roads are covered in white. Matter of fact, they had 15 inches of snow at Whiteface, Mount Mansfield. At Stowe, a foot of snow. That's the most snow those two places have had this early since 2010. All right, let's look at the cold air. It's really the entire half of the country. And that does include folks in North Carolina, which are dealing, obviously, still with recovery there. Still thousands of people without power. So a very, very cold morning there. Milton, Florida, not to be confused with the hurricane. They had a record low of just under 40 degrees. So parts of Florida under 40 degrees. And it goes back to much of the deep south as well. But what I love about this time of year is that as cold as it can be in the morning, the sun is still strong and will pop back pretty nicely. So we'll go from 10 to 20 degrees below normal this morning across pretty much everyone east of the Mississippi, to more like 5 to 10 degrees below normal later on this afternoon. A little bit warmer in the midsection, and another pulse of cold air coming down the pipe from the Pacific Northwest, and that will bring a threat for snow for the Intermountain West over the next couple of days. Matter of fact, that low is going to sit and spin over the Four Corners, and that will cause some. We got winter storm warnings already up for parts of Utah. Snow level right about 9,000 feet. So some of the higher passes, I-15, I-70, we'll see some winter driving conditions beginning tomorrow and really pour right in through Sunday. So everybody getting a little piece of the action with winter. But remember, it is still hurricane season right until the end of November, and October can still be obviously very, very active. We saw that with Milton. We do have two areas of active weather that we're watching. Low percentages of development heading towards the U.S., but this time of year, we look more towards the Gulf of Mexico, and right now, it's pretty quiet. I know, Vlad, you don't want to go cover another hurricane, so hopefully we can end the season quietly.
I do hope, just for the sake of those folks in those areas that were affected by those recent hurricanes, that we don't have to get back out there, Rob, you and I. But I'm also struck by seeing the southeastern portion of the country in blue on that radar map. That's like kind of remarkable.
Everybody's feeling it, my friend. Everybody's
feeling it. All right, Rob Marciano for us. Thank you, Rob. Appreciate you.
You bet.
Okay, folks, there's a new study that suggests diabetes drugs like Ozempic could help patients suffering from addiction to substances. We're going to break down what researchers found. You're streaming CBS News 24/7. New research released this morning suggests diabetes drugs like Mounjaro and Ozempic, which some people also use to lose weight, may also help patients suffering from addiction to drugs and alcohol. I want to bring in Dr. Celine Gounder for more on this. She's a CBS News contributor and editor-at-large for public health at KFF Health News. Celine, good to see you. So we were talking about this earlier. Explain how this study, or what this study says about these medications and how it might potentially affect people who are battling addiction.
So this was a study looking at electronic health records from patients at over 130 health systems across the country over almost 10 years. So it's quite a large data set. And what they found is that in people who had opioid use disorder, the rate of opioid overdoses went down by 40% among those taking these weight loss medications. And for people who had alcohol use disorder, the rate of alcohol intoxication went down by 50%. And these are opioid overdoses, alcohol intoxication that brought people to the attention of healthcare providers. They ended up in the ER, the hospital. So these are very serious events that are being prevented, it would seem, by these medications.
So in the future, then, could patients be prescribed these drugs for addiction, even if they don't have diabetes or are obese? And would that be just maybe a pleasant byfunction of this, which would be that you would lose some weight?
It's certainly possible. We still haven't seen randomized clinical trials on this, which is the gold standard. It's what you would need, or what the companies would need to submit to the FDA for an expanded indication, which also then paves the way perhaps for insurance coverage. Right now, insurance coverage remains very very difficult to get, even for people who do have obesity, one of the core indications. But it is certainly possible that in the future we will see broader use for a number of medical conditions.
So this is what I think is so interesting, Celine, is that oftentimes medications that are on the market or developed to treat one kind of symptom end up being useful for something else. And that's happened with a slew of medications over the last couple of years. Why is that? Why help our audience understand when a pharmaceutical company is developing a drug, it's say targeting one particular ailment that they discover later on that it actually works to help with other things?
Well, so these drugs, they're called GLP-1 drugs. They mimic the hormone that's made naturally by the gut, the GLP-1 hormone. But in making it for a medication, they made it so that it would last a lot longer. So it lasts a full week. You only have to inject yourself once a week. That lasts much, much longer than what you make naturally yourself. And as a result, we're also seeing more penetration into the brain. And so seeing these effects that we have not seen with the natural hormone itself. And what we think is that these drugs are having an impact on the dopamine reward pathway in the brain. And if you think about, addiction, it's really about reward and an abnormal reward system, whether it's addiction to food or addiction to alcohol or opioids. And so there's probably a lot of overlap in the neurology, neuroscience of this.
Fascinating. Dr. Celine Gounder, always great to have you, my friend. Thank you. A new round of student debt relief just announced by the White House. We've got the details on who will be impacted by this latest round. You're streaming CBS News 24/7. Taking a look at some of our top stories, including the breaking news we've been following all morning long. Israel's military says it is investigating the possibility that it has killed the leader of Hamas, Yahya Sinwar, in Gaza. They are still trying to make a positive identification with his DNA. Israel says he was the mastermind of the October 7th attack. If this is confirmed, this would mark a major development in the war in the Middle East. We'll keep tabs on this all throughout the day. The man convicted of killing a Las Vegas journalist has been sentenced to 28 years in prison. Robert Tellis was found guilty of fatally stabbing Jeff German. Prosecutors say German's investigative reporting resulted in Tellis losing his bid for a second term as a county office administrator. Tellis plans to appeal his conviction. And in Washington, President Biden has canceled another $4.5 billion in student loan debt. This new round is for public servants. The White House says that brings the total number of teachers, firefighters, and others who have had loans canceled to more than 1 million under the Biden-Harris administration. Several Republican-led states, though, are suing over the plan. Sports now. The Los Angeles Dodgers dominated the New York Mets. Oh, man, everybody's shaking their head. Grumbling here. Folks, the score 8-0. Game 3 of the National League Championship Series. They now lead the best-of-7 showdown 2-1. Star slugger Shohei Ohtani hit a 3-run home run. Oh, boy. Tony DeCoppel was at this game, the co-host of CBS Mornings. He said as soon as Ohtani hit that, people were just like, let's go home. The Dodgers pitching staff, meanwhile, held the Mets to just 4 hits. Game 4 of the series is tonight. I still believe. Guys, I'm with you. Miracle Mets. Let's go. The other New York team, the New York Yankees, will face off against the Guardians in Game 3 of the American League Championship Series. New York holds a 2-0 series lead. They have more money. Let's just say it, right? They got more money than the Mets, right? They can buy more people. The Guardians have not held a lead in either of the 2 games played this series. And also, let's not forget the New York Liberty, folks. Come on, WNBA. Let us bring in CBS News senior weather correspondent Rob Marciano with one final look at the national forecast. Rob, you're here. You're at CBS. You got to either be Mets, you got to be Yankees. Which one are you?
Oh, I try to be nonpartisan, but it's going to come out now. I'm a Yankee fan, okay?
All right.
I'm a Yankee fan, and the EP of the show is a Yankee fan, so I know where my bread's butter, at least between 10 and 11. Let's talk Mets, though. You mentioned that, the miracle. Let's see if we can make it happen here. Today, it's going to be chilly at Shea, 55 degrees to start the game. Tomorrow's a day game, a little bit earlier. It starts earlier. It'll be 65 degrees, and the Yanks playing in Cleveland, as you mentioned tonight. Very chilly to start. Should be nice to at 57 degrees. And then tomorrow is the night game, 59 degrees. So, this is perfect October playoff weather for baseball. No rain or snow in the forecast for that matter. So they certainly will take it, and everybody else can have to bundle up until the sun warms things up this weekend. Vlad?
All right, Rob Marciano for us this morning. Thanks, Rob. And that does it for me, but stay right where you are. Elizabeth Cook is live from San Francisco with all the breaking news coast to coast after the break. This is CBS News 24/7.